Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Uncapped. When last we spoke, I was telling you all about older vintage Sheaffer fountain pens that I think you should all be buying right now. And at the end of that episode, I talked about the possibility of coming back and doing a second episode that was just focused on sort of the writing samples of the nibs. And so here we are. That is what we're going to do today. I have pulled out from my collection like 26 or so, 25 different fountain pens. Some are similar models, some are very different. But what I tried to do was represent kind of like a universe of different pens as long as I had them and the nibs that went with them. So I've said this before on the channel, I buy a lot of broad nibs. I shop for a lot of broad nibs. My collection is very nib centric, and you'll see that somewhat today. But I've also tried to include the extra fines, the mediums, to the extent I had something to show you so you can kind of get a sense on the variety. Now, let me talk about the variety for a second because that deserves special attention before we get into all of this. Vintage nibs, older nibs, were manufactured by people in a factory day in and day out. They worked under general, specs, I guess you would say, general guidelines, but when it comes to nibs from the vintage world, it is to some degree subjective how you would grade them. What do I mean by that? Someone might call something a fine, they might call it a medium, they might call it an extra fine, and then you try writing with it and you feel that that grading is off either by a size up or down, right? So I'm going to show you sort of the variety I have the capacity. So I have like very fine nibs through to more medium nibs from some of the older stuff, some very broad nibs from the Snorkels and the touchdowns through to, the broads. As you get later in the history, right, things became, I think, a little more standardized. So you kind of know what they're going to look like. But even then, they're hand finished. So it's going to be a little bit different. But I just want to give you all a flavor for what's out there and what you're seeing and what the different nibs actually look like. Because we talked a little bit about that last time, but I think it's sort of interesting, particularly with Sheaffer, because they did so much to innovate with the way their nibs looked that, it's kind of cool to just have a little look at stuff that's out there. Again, I trying to be comprehensive, but I can't be precisely thorough because I don't track the catalog. Like I didn't collect the catalog. So you're going to see a lot of samples of things, but it's not everything. There's going to be stuff you're clearly going to find out there. For example, I don't know if I have a lifetime nib in here to show you. I guess this would be the lifetime nib, but you'll see that not everything is the same. So with that, let's actually get into the pens themselves, and we're going to start here with the Student 22. So for today's exercise, we're going to use the Tomoe River paper I have here. It's the cream color. It's the pad you've all seen on the channel multiple times. I don't actually use this paper, but I really like it for what we do here. I think it shows up on the camera really nice, and it highlights the pens really nice. And, it is nice paper. I know there was various controversial things about the generation from Sanson, but I'm enjoying it. Today's ink is going to be Sheaffer Script Blue Black. This is like the oldest bottle of this particular ink that I have, and we're going to use it so long as it holds out, unless the pen actually has some ink in it. I have water nearby to rehydrate, and we'll go one step at a time. The other thing is I realized I didn't really show close-ups of the nib, so I'm going to try and show you a close-up of every nib we're going to write with so you can just see it in all its glory, and then we'll do a little writing sample just so you can get a sense of what it is we're talking about. So here is the Sheaffer Student 22. Again, one of the oldest Sheaffer pens that I own. It just on the camera here looks to be a fine nib. So let's go to the paper and see how it writes. So here in action is the Sheaffer. I'm actually going to write a little further down so that we get better contact. So this is the Sheaffer. Student 20. Oh, we're out of ink. So as you can see as I'm writing, this thing has some play, right? So it's a fine nib, but it's got some flex, right? Not really a super fine nib or what anyone will call an extra fine, but just a nice vintage fine. It's a little toothy from age, I think, but it's got so much character. Why would you mess with it? Right? So, pen from the 19 teens or the 1920s. Nice little flex. You can write very small with it, even though it's a somewhat wet writer. I mean, how small can you get? No one ever does that in reviews, writes really small versus really large, just to see how it comes out. Anyway, that is the Sheaffer Student 22. Something to look for. Obviously, if you're looking on eBay, you're not going to know precisely what the character of the writing is going to be, but definitely worth shopping for. And if you like a little bit of flex, a little bit of sort of that calligraphy look from the old days, this is definitely a good option. The next pens we're going to look at are the Sheaffer Lifetime Flattops. Obviously, this one is in really rough shape. I bought it. It was discoloring. In the 10 years or so that I've owned this, the celluloid has started to deteriorate. But like many things that I own, the nib is super wonderful. So we're going to write with it in a second. This you saw last time. It was the example I talked about when we talked about the Sheaffer Lifetime Flat Top. So let's have a close-up of each of these nibs and a writing sample. We're going to start with my deteriorating green pen because it has the finer of the two nibs, I believe. I used this when I first got it. I replaced the diaphragm inside, and I wrote with it for quite a bit of time. I took it to the office and whatnot. It was one of my early vintage fountain pen experiences. Back in those days, you could get something beat up like this at a pen show very, very inexpensively. I think I may have paid $10 for this. And as you can see, I have this giant gold nib. So here we have the Sheaffer, call it green, Lifetime Flat Top. It has a firm, what I'm going to call fine, but some of you out there may say this writes more like a medium. I think it's a fine, not medium. There is no real flex to this. In fact, I think if you try to flex it, it's going to get not burnt. It's going to get bent out of shape. So I would not try and press on these even as a test. In fact, it probably won't even let you do that. It's so thick and solid, which is one of the characteristics with these types of nibs. But on the other hand, it is super smooth on this paper and super enjoyable to use. So even if this pen goes on me, like the cap deteriorates or something, I can always put it into another body and have a great nib that will write for a long time. Again, we'll do just a little demo. So the mini writing. For those of you who like a really fine nib and like to write very fine. Because it's starting to bleed a little bit together there. Anyway, that is the fine, which is a very common nib size you're going to find with these pens. Here is that black Sheaffer Lifetime Flat Top, and you can see the tipping on this is much more generous, right? It's unclear to me. We'll see when we write. Is it a medium? Is it a broad? Can it be shaped to be broader? Perhaps, but we're going to write with it as is. But again, you can see how thick and how serious that piece of gold is. So obviously this is not going to flex like the Student 22. It's going to write much more akin to this, but it's going to have hopefully a wider line and stroke as I go through. So here we have the Sheaffer Black Lifetime Flat Top. And I'll just say my favorite gangster in Dick Tracy is the Flat Top, so I've always felt a special relationship with these pens. This one I'm going to say is probably in its current state writing like a medium. It's a very firm medium, but a very smooth medium. Maybe has a little bit more toothiness, and that could just be from a little bit of the wear, but as I'm writing again, it's an excellent experience. And I'll say you just don't get the experience with modern nibs like you do with this. That is to me the greatest argument for giving vintage fountain pens a shot beyond the aesthetics and some of the design features. It's really the writing experience that can't be beat. And these three here kind of to me highlight why a pen so old is worth taking a chance on, because you get a really great experience. During my original shoot of this episode, I did a demonstration of the nib in this pen, and unfortunately the recording didn't work out. I don't really know what happened. In any event, I decided to reshoot it, and because some time has passed between filming the original and this moment, I actually found two more pens to talk about and show you the nibs, and I acquired this Sheaffer Balance, which also has kind of an interesting nib. So I figured I'd give you a little more just by virtue of the passage of time and me finding some other pens. This has like a extra fine. This I would say looks like a medium. This, the retipped one, is kind of a medium broad, and then this one has a stub, although I'm not sure the nib in it is original to this model, but it is an original Sheaffer nib. So let's check these out and see how they write. So we're starting with this green oversized Balance, sometimes called the Balance OS. You might see them online. This one has a very fine lifetime nib. So for all you itty bitty nib lovers out there, hopefully this satisfies what you're looking for. So let's check it out. So this is the Sheaffer lifetime Balance OS green, and I'm going to call this a XF/F nib. This one is a little bit toothy, I think, from age, but the size is great, and that just thick gold nib is wonderful. And you can see that due to sort of that vintagey way they made the nib, it's got a little bit of character that you might not find in a more modern pen. All right. Here is my black oversized Balance. Now, I will say, if you look at the pen, right, the cap looks a little short compared to how it is proportionally in the green pen. It may be that someone stuck a shorter cap on this. I don't really know. I've had it quite a while. It's user grade, although it is a big pen, so really have no complaints. But here's the nib. You can see right there. This is the lifetime nib, and it looks like it's probably going to write something of a medium. Again, you can see how thick and sturdy that nib is. So let's check out how this one writes. So here we have our Sheaffer lifetime Balance OS, and maybe because I dipped it, I would say that this is writing much more akin to a broad for me, but that may just be the fact that it's dipped and not filled, because I didn't want to take the trouble to clean it out. So we'll call this one also a medium broad. It is absolutely wonderful. I mean, whereas this one was a little toothy, maybe owing to age, maybe owing just to the shape of the tipping because it's a finer nib. This one is just gorgeous, rounded, and an absolute joy to write with. So again, I know you're all getting sick of me saying these things are great, but the fact is, and one cannot change, they are in fact great. So that is this lifetime oversize. The next pen we're going to look at is also a lifetime Balance, but it is not the oversized. I actually don't know what size this would be called. As you can see, though, it is smaller than the first one we took a look at. This, I go back and forth whether this should be included in a video like this or not. As you can see, the tipping looks very different than the other lifetime nibs we've looked at, and that's because it's been retipped. I think I said that before. It is a lifetime nib. It has all the characteristics. It's not what came out of the factory like the other pens we've been looking at. However, I think there's value in just seeing what the retip nib looks like. So we'll take a quick look at it and then we'll move on from there. So here we have another Sheaffer lifetime balance. I don't know exactly what they would call this side, if it was standard, if it was, junior or something like that. I don't really know, but so I'm not going to label it, but it is green and it has a retipped, we'll also call this medium/broad. So although it feels different than the two other balanced lifetime nibs we've looked at so far, I will say it writes very nice. The man who retipped it, his name is Andy Bellevue. Very talented jeweler, pen restorer. He does great work with overlays. He makes his own silver hardware, silver jewelry. He actually, as far as I know, had several lives, including being a jeweler and other things. So, very talented guy, and that's who I got this pen from. As I said before, I think maybe in the previous episode, it was only about $80-something to get it in, I think, working order with the nib retip. So it was a pretty good deal in my mind. I'm enjoying writing with it right now. In fact, I'm just making idle chit chat so I don't have to stop. In any event, that is the 3 lifetime balances, and you can see, the OG one that's sort of medium broad is maybe a little more generous than this. This is a little bit finer, and then obviously this is a very fine nib compared to these other two. Lastly, we have this really beautiful, and I mean, I did a little cleanup on it after I got it, but a really beautiful balance. I think it's labeled a balance 500. I think that's the size. It's in this beautiful red, I think it was called Carmine striated celluloid, and it is just absolutely wonderful. I got this recently, actually, after I filmed kind of the other pens that I demoed in this video. And when I realized the balance footage was completely shot, I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to add to it because I just really want to show this off. Again, not an expensive purchase. And one of the reasons I think was that this nib was kind of messed up. You can kind of see, if I show you closer, like there's a little bit of a scratch on the bottom and it's a little bit wonky looking. It needed tuning. I mean, you couldn't just write with this out of the package, essentially. So I had to tune it up, and the cost reflected that. And you can see it has this Sheaffer's number 5 nib. I think this is a replacement. It fits. There were number 5 nibs that I think were made in an earlier era that were probably original to this pen, and then someone fitted in a replacement, although the replacement itself arguably could have used a replacement if you didn't want to have someone actually unbend it and fix it, which is a decision sometimes you got to make. Is the replacement more affordable than having someone tinker with it? Anyway, I cleaned this all up, I restored it. I'm very excited. So let's see how this, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, I've tested it. I think it's more of like a medium or fine stub, and you'll see it's got some nice calligraphy like sharpness when we write with it. So let's take a look right now. Here we have the Sheaffer balance 500 Carmine red. Again, an amazing color. And we're going to call this a replacement number 5 stub. So it's a vintage stub from the factory. I don't think anyone ground this. Doesn't look that way. Get it to focus. And you can see it's got some nice line variation. And depending on what angle you have it at, you can either get a softer cross stroke like that, so you see it's a little heavier, or if you make it more vertical, you'll get a sharper cross stroke like that. In any event, this, is sort of, I think, the pinnacle of the, golden era of Sheaffer pre-war into the World War II era. And, you know, these pens, again, you can get bargains on them if you're willing to suffer a little bit of weirdness with the condition, whether it is a cap that may be a little too short, or as you can see here, some defects in the plating on the hardware. But in the end, right, the writing experience is what one focuses on, and these pens are absolutely great. So that completes our look, and we'll zoom out just for a little bit completeness. That completes our look at the balances. Let's get back to our next category of pens, which I believe are the touchdowns. So now we come to what for me is a really interesting period in the history of Sheaffer, which is the period when they've introduced the plunger fillers. And this one, actually, the plunger filler needs to be restored, but it doesn't stop us from writing with the nib. So you see, here's the Triumph nib. It's got kind of a wider profile, and of the three I'm going to show you, I think this one is going to write the finest. So here's the nib close up. You can see the gold goes all the way around. It has this sort of flip up design, which Sheaffer, especially in this period, was known for, and they kind of carried through even to some degree to today, depending on the nib you're talking about. This has this really nice like tortoise brown striped celluloid for the body, and a gold cap. You'll see I have green striped or striated celluloid on the other two pens. In any event, this is a fairly fine looking nib, so let's see how it writes. Now, there is a specific name for this model. I just don't happen to know it. So I'm just going to, for our exercise here, write Sheaffer. We'll call it a fat plunger filler and I'm going to say this is like straddling a fine, extra fine. Like in some strokes, or depending on the pressure, it feels very fine. Some strokes it feels a little broader. But, here's the big but. Despite being a fairly fine nib, this nib is absolutely buttery smooth. Like, can't be beat. Part of that is because of the way that flip works, the idea being that you're writing on like a smoother side of the nib, so it's not surprising that it's so fine and so smooth at the same time. However, I can't stop scribbling with it. Sorry. Let's move on. This is the first one. As you can see, it's sort of, to me, on the finest side. You get some really fine lines, you get a little thicker line depending on what it is you're doing. Other thing I'll just draw your attention to is because of that small amount of variation, I feel like these nibs have a lot of character when you write with them. The next plunger filler has actually been restored. I showed it to you all last time. So that will fill if I wanted to, which we're not going to do right now. But you can see that this nib is a bit broader, but nonetheless, I think it's going to write like a fine nib. So let's give that a chance. All the way down at the bottom of the page here, we have Sheaffer. We'll say plunger filler number 2. It's the green striated, and this has, see, to me this is more on the wavelength of a fine, but again it's got some nice line variation, so depending on the direction you're moving the pen, it feels a little more medium at times, which I kind of dig. I think a lot of folks will kind of dig. Again, you can't really flex these things, although every now and then you find someone who says they have a flex Triumph nib. It's a little toothier than this one, which is interesting because it's a little broader, but that may again just be a little bit of the wear with age, a little bit of difference in the finishing from the factory. But nonetheless, no real complaints about this one. And this one will actually fill if I wanted to. So I could fill this up right now and go off and write with it, which maybe I'll do a little bit later. So here is our third plunger filler with a Triumph nib. And I'll just point out, whereas this one had the white dot on the front of the pen, this one interestingly has it on the top. Interesting little variation on the pen. This one, to me, just from the naked eye, looks very similar to the pen we were just writing with. But again, these things with age sometimes round out a little bit. They get a little more blunted or they get a little sharp in places. So let's try writing with it, because obviously that is the ultimate arbiter of how this nib is going to write, is how it writes. So here we have Sheaffer, Plunger, filler, number, oh, not number 2, number 3. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is more like a medium, because it definitely writes a broader line than, say, number 2. Less toothy than number 2 as well. And I'm seeing just a little bit of drag, so I think this probably needs a little bit of an adjustment. I also dipped it, so I don't know if there's some funky things going on because it really hasn't been cleaned out. But as you can see, once this thing gets going, it is absolutely gorgeous. One other thing, you know, I keep talking about this phenomenon of a great nib that writes in one of these pens, but, you know, something's a little off about the pens. You've kind of already seen that. Let me just show you with this one what the deal is. This one, if you look at it, is a little bit askew. So if you look over here, you might see that like the cap kind of angles a little bit to the side. And I don't know if that's partly just way the threading on this ring is sitting versus what's in here, or this is a little bit off and the celluloid shrunk on one side. I haven't really examined it that closely, but it's not a pristine pen. That's my point to all of you. I think if you try and fill it, you can't even move this. So it would have to go to someone to be fixed. I don't do these myself. It's a little more complicated than I like to get involved with. And you need some kind of special techniques that really no other pen has. So there's a few people that restore these. And so I probably will be sending these two off relatively soon, because they need the restoration. And, you know, the writing experience here, it's like a shame to just have them sitting unrestored. Anyway, that's more about me than all of you, so let's move on. We come now to these two striated celluloid pens. They're both green, and they have an unusual characteristic, and that is what's called the military clip. So military regulations for the US military was that your pen couldn't rise above a certain level in your pocket. And so what Sheaffer did, and actually Parker did this as well, they designed what was called the military clip. So the pen was actually designed so that if it sat in an officer or soldier's pocket, it would not violate regulation and they would not get in trouble. So these are very popular from the World War II period, obviously, because there was a lot of people in the military of that time. And these have a sort of different design. This is a plunger filler, but it has what's called a feather touch nib that you can see right there. So we'll try writing with that in a second. The other one has a different nib. I'll show you that in a moment. I do not know if the feather touch is original to this pen or it was a replacement. As you can see, the feed looks a little different from what we've been seeing so far, and it all seems to fit together. So let's give this a try in terms of writing. So this is the Sheaffer green plunger filler with military clip. Now, I don't know if you can hear this. It's got kind of a toothy sound, but because it's dipped, it's writing very nice and wet. It is, for me right now, sort of on that fine medium wavelength. Again, depending on the direction in which you're going, it feels like it's got a heavier stroke or a lighter stroke. But again, despite the toothiness, and for all of you feedback fans, I mean, this would probably be your jam. It is also a very easy and enjoyable nib to use. So that is the Feather Touch. You see them in different pens. I believe they are a lifetime nib, but don't quote me. It's just another nib design that Sheaffer had. As you can see, this one doesn't have that kind of like flip on the front, so you catch a little bit of the sharp edge right over there. But again, I have no complaints about it. So here is our second Sheaffer with a military clip, and if I unscrew it, you'll see it has a similar feed, but the nib is somewhat different. So this is a Sheaffer lifetime nib. It's two-tone, similar to the Feather Touch. This one is, as I said, a lever filler, but in the same type of celluloid. Again, in terms of aesthetics, you can see it kind of bulges out a little bit there. Nonetheless, like, I took this apart and resacked it. You see there's like the clear section there. It's sort of an ink view window within the section there. So really nice military clip. Presumably was marketed for a member of the armed forces to use. So let's give this one a try. So this one is our Sheaffer lifetime lever filler with the military clip. And this one writes a little bit drier than the other one, but I would say is nonetheless very enjoyable. Are you all sick of me saying that these are enjoyable to use? Like, no matter what problems it has, I like tell you it's great. So this one also, it's a little bit worn with age and obviously can be fixed, but it's more of a fine nib, so you get a little more toothiness anyway from it. But again, in terms of like writing on this paper, it gives a really nice experience. You really kind of feel like you're marrying to the paper when you're writing. I don't know if you all know what you kind of have that experience where it's like you kind of put the pen to the paper and it just feels like the grain of the paper and the surface of the nib kind of marry really nicely as you write. That's kind of the sensation that I'm getting with this, and obviously you could see it induced a lot of scribbles. So that is the Sheaffer military two-tone lifetime nib. If you remember last time I had kind of a silver striated pen, the similar nib goes in it. It's also a lever filler. Just had a regular clip as opposed to the military clip. Okay, we're now going to look at a series of touchdown and snorkel models. You may remember last time I mentioned that there were two snorkel models. There was the thinner one, which came later, known as the touchdown TM, but then there was the fat touchdowns. So I believe this is a fat touchdown. So has a metal cap. All of these things have names, but I don't trust myself to identify them in a way that I can be certain and tell all of you that's what it is. So I'm just referring to them generically. This has a Triumph nib, which you'll see in various touchdown and snorkel models. And unlike the plunger fillers, when you screw the back knob, right, you get the touchdown filler, right? And you can kind of hear that in the back there. Okay. This one, I'm going to say, is probably a fine. In fact, I can see a little bit of fiber stuck in the nib. You see that it has that kind of curved profile to, again, allow you to write on the smoothest part of the nib and try to avoid the top there, which just running my finger on is a little sharp. Because I can't help myself, I just want to show you all the touchdown filling system in action. So this pen, I had restored it a number of years ago and it's still working. So that's what inspired me to do this little demo right now. So as I was explaining before, so you withdraw the knob here and it pulls out this tube. You just submerge the nib in the ink and then you push down. And so what you saw there was those air bubbles going out. It was the sac inside getting compressed. And then when this thing was done traveling all the way down, it released that pressure and the pen sucked up ink. So if you withdraw that tube again, you know, you could see there that there was like a drop that came out. That was getting squeezed, and then it will actually empty right there and there. Let's do that again. Right? So you can see ink is coming out of there. I'm going to actually just do this, and then we'll try writing with whatever inky, watery residue is left in it. So this is the Sheaffer Fat Touchdown. And it, to me, is undisputably an F nib. It's a Triumph nib. And surprise, surprise, it is extremely, I don't know what I was writing there. That's wrong. Extremely enjoyable. To the point that today, following this video, this one is definitely getting cleaned out and put into my writing rotation, because in every way it is a spectacular pen. And again, you know, I keep repeating myself about all of these, but I just want to revisit another point I made last time, which is something like this, right? If you go on eBay, you may find this for like 40 bucks. And you can learn to restore this yourself. It's really not hard. It takes, you know, maybe $7 of supplies and maybe like an investment of like $20 and some very simple, straightforward tools. I'm not going to get into all of that right now. But the upshot of it is, right, you can get a beautiful gold nib fountain pen. I mean, this thing is probably the size of a Sailor Pro Gear or thereabouts, or close enough, right? For a quarter of the cost or something, or less than a quarter now, like an eighth of the cost. And between purchasing the pen and then either doing it yourself or paying somebody to restore this, you get a really phenomenal pen, right? And so what are we saying? You get it for $80 to $90 all in, and I guess whatever your time might be worth if you do it yourself. So again, a great pen. You can find this in different designs. You know, they have ones that sort of have the same detailing as this. This is a Snorkel, I believe. Has more of this type of plastic cap with a big fat cap ring. This is the type that has the metal cap. There are different versions of this, but definitely something I highly recommend everybody check out. You should have one. They're really durable. The plastics last. Take care of it. It's just, you can't do better than this. We now come to a pen I showed you last time, which is the Sheaffer Craftsman. Also, it has, and it needs to be restored because it's a little tight, that Sheaffer touchdown filling mechanism. This one, although the pen itself looks a little bit, I don't want to say beat up, but it just is not, to me, this design with this like kind of big exaggerated cap ring was not like the high point of Sheaffer's design. But when you look at this nib, to me it's just like, you know, who cares about that cap? Like, this might be an amazing writing experience. So this is not a lifetime nib. This is what is marked here, as you can see, the Sheaffer's 33 nib. The Craftsman, I don't think, was a lifetime nib or a lifetime model, so it didn't carry that guarantee. Putting aside whether it had the lifetime guarantee or not, these are awesome pens. So let's try writing with this. We are here with our Sheaffer. It's writing a little wet, and I don't want to give you a false positive. Sheaffer Craftsman touchdown. This one has, I'm going to say, an M nib. As I said, it's the Sheaffer's 33 nib. And it is wonderful. So this one has kind of an interesting profile. You can kind of see the tipping there, bulges out on the bottom, but it's just shaped so well that it writes really, really nice. And obviously it's running out of ink. So that's the Craftsman. I don't remember if this has ever been restored. It's a little bit tight, but then, yeah. You don't hear, usually when you get the I don't want to say plunger, but when you get the tube here all the way down, so at this point, you should hear right there, like a whooshing sound of the sack being released. I don't hear that, so I think this needs to be fixed, but as you can see, another pen I should be writing with. I think I got this at a pen show, sort of just because I found it with the nib. It was in relatively good condition, and I was like, let's give it a whirl. We're now going to look at 4 different snorkels. And one thing I'll just remind everyone, I mentioned this in the previous video. The touchdown model, right, was available as something called the touchdown TM, which looks exactly like this. So you may find pens that look like snorkels, but they don't actually have that snorkel mechanism. What do I mean by that? It is this right here, you know, the snorkel comes out and then you fill through that tube right there, right? You'll find them without, you'll find them with different nib designs. So this obviously is the conical Triumph nib. Snorkels and touchdowns were all available with what we call an open nib, which is sort of that nib design that we all think of when it comes to fountain pens. So the first snorkel we're going to look at right here, move this back into the light a little bit, is, and I think probably closest to extra fine of all the snorkels I own. So let's give this a try. So here we have our Sheaffer snorkel. This is gray. We've got the little ligature there. I think this, I think this is more of a fine. As I was writing with it, I sort of said, I don't think this is really extra fine as one would define that. But for whatever it is, fine, extra fine, what have you, let's actually get closer so you can see a little bit better what we're talking about. It is very smooth and buttery. So a worthy contender for anyone's fountain pen collection. Our next snorkel is a gray snorkel as well, and it has probably more of a medium nib. I'm looking at it and I'm not exactly sure. At first I thought it was going to write a little finer, but we'll see. It's two-tone, unlike the previous one, and it is got, interestingly, a gold snorkel, I guess a brass or something, compared to the snorkel in the other one. I can't give you the exact history of why one metal is on one snorkel and one is on the other, but more importantly, let's see how this nib writes. So this is Sheaffer snorkel gray number 2, and I'm going to say that this is also a fine nib. And like most of these nibs, it is smooth, excellent, and absolutely firm. Like you were not getting any flex out of this, but totally gorgeous nib, and not sorry to have written with that at all. The next snorkel, I believe, actually comes from Australia. Yeah, you can see there on the nib. It says Sheaffer, Australia. And as you can see, unlike the previous 2 snorkels, this thing has one honking, wild, crazy amount of tipping. I don't know how Sheaffer would have graded this back in the day. I bought it as a broad. I don't know if they ever describe their nibs as being double broads or just broad. But as you're going to see in a second, this thing writes like a paintbrush. So if you're like me and you love nibs like that, this is absolutely perfect. If you want something much more refined and exacting, this is probably not the nib for you. But let's have a look. So here we have the Sheaffer Australia. It ran out of ink because it is putting down a lot of ink. This is a snorkel. There you go. So look at that. Right, so fully engorged feed. Very broad. Now, I will tell you that broad nibs like this usually command a premium when it comes to pens like this. So you're going to be paying probably closer to $100 just for the pen before you get into, you know, any sort of restoration or repair work. But nonetheless, I mean, this is just an absolutely amazing, delicious nib. Our next nib is actually also a broad nib, but this is an American broad. I really love this nib. I think you'll all enjoy seeing it, right? One thing I'll just point out is that there was a really nice little engraving on the cap ring. So it says, "To Bessie with love." Don't really know much more than that, but I hope Bessie loved this pen. As you can see, this has this interesting notation there, M5, which may mean medium. It was sold as a broad, and you'll see it's going to write kind of broad, not as broad as that, but it nonetheless has a pretty generous tip. Here we have our Sheaffer. There we go. This is the M5 Snorkel for Bessie. And I guess comparing all of this, I would put this more in the sort of medium camp, but it has a little bit of that stubbiness. So let's get some more ink. Obviously, these bigger nibs put down more ink than any of the finer ones. So let's see. I mean, I would say, you know, when it's super wet like this, like it's fully dipped and writing like a really heavy line, yeah, it's more or less a broad. But probably as you write it out, let's just dab a little ink off, it gets closer to a medium. I don't know about that. I guess it's medium broad. This is what I was saying at the top, you know, like things can be graded, but they're sort of subjective and relative. So, you know, I would say that this writes more like a broad, but some of you may say it's a medium. Some of you may say it's also like a paintbrush like that one. But you can see that obviously the lines are heavier than some of the other stuff we've written with so far. We're now going to look at other versions of the touchdown filler that were incorporated into various later pens. And so here we have probably one of the most cost-effective pens if you wanted to try the touchdown system, but you didn't want to spend a lot of money. And that is the Sheaffer Cadet. And you see two of them right here, right? So we have the metal cap one and we have the all plastic one. I'm going to put the metal cap one to the side for a second and show you this one. This one has what's marked as an M1 nib. So it's steel. These actually screw out on their own, although this one seems to be sticking. There we go. So they're their own nib units, and they screw in and out. And they're kind of interesting because they sort of incorporate two aspects of the pens we were just looking at. So there's no snorkel, but it has this opening here that you can kind of see. There's like a feed almost within the feed, and that is the tip dip. So you would submerge the nib just enough to cover that up, and then ink would be drawn using the touchdown system through that aperture, right? So whereas the snorkel, something came out, this you just submerged it in the ink. So it's more like a touchdown, but it has something kind of akin to the snorkel going on because they're all theoretically tip nibs, meaning you can fill without submerging the full length and depth of that nib. Anyway, this first one is a medium, and let's try writing with it. Okay, we have the Sheaffer Cadet. Call it burgundy for now. And it has an M1 steel nib. So I will tell you, to me, it is a very conservative medium in that the tipping, perhaps because that's a steel nib, is not that generous. It's a little toothy, but it's nonetheless really enjoyable to use. And I would say that it feels somewhat finer than the M5. Our second cadet has the Sheaffer tip dip stub. So as you can see, it's marked S1, made in the USA. Also a steel nib, has the same feed. Obviously the pen's a little bit different in kind of the color design, but this is what they call a stub. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to write much more like a cursive italic that we're all used to nowadays. So here we have, and this had ink in it that I was able to rehydrate. This is the Sheaffer Cadet, and this is the S1 steel nib. And as you can probably see at this point, it is writing like a very nice kind of cursive italic line. So I've said this before, the Sheaffer stubs, as they're called, often write more like what we consider the cursive italic to be. So, very enjoyable. I'd say both of these really nice nibs for what they are, and I would recommend anyone looking to kind of test out what they think of this type of pen with the touchdown filler, kind of a tip dip situation. These are definitely a great option, and I know that if you go on to eBay, Mercari, Etsy, all of them, you can find these pens like in fairly decent supply, and you can find them with different nibs, different caps, different colors. They're sort of student pens, and they're totally worth just bumming around. Durable, well made, and a really nice size to just play around with. We're now going to turn to some of the Imperial nibs that I discussed last time. And by Imperial, it's that Sheaffer inlaid nibs. There's a Imperial that's a conical nib as well. Triumph Imperial, I think is what it's called. Anyway, I wanted to start with the ones that actually have the touchdown filling system in them. So this one is sort of a gold-plated Imperial. It's got a gold 14K nib. I think it's a fine, but we'll see in a second. And it fills with the touchdown filling system. So here is that Imperial nib up close. And let's see how it writes. This is the Sheaffer. I believe it's an Imperial inlaid nib with TD filler. Although I thought maybe this was a fine, as I write with it, it's a very nice and ever so slightly toothy, depending on the angle, medium 14K nib. So as you can see, I mentioned that kind of like angled flip up that, you saw in some of the earlier nibs. There we go, that focused. The way that this is made, it also has that angling, so you're writing on like a smoother surface of the nib. I showed you this pen in the last video. This is also a touchdown filler. You can see it here. This is a different version of the Triumph pens. I think this is called the Triumph Imperial because it has a conical nib, but was made in the Imperial era. So it's, I believe, a medium as well. And this one, I believe, is a steel nib as opposed to gold. So let's try writing with that. So this is the Sheaffer Imperial Triumph nib, and it is an M steel conical nib. And I will say, although this is fine, this is not fine in terms of width. It's fine experience. So far, this is my least exciting nib that I've tried on this video here today. So, little toothy, but nice and smooth. Just not that excited about it. I will tell you, I used this pen for a while when I first got it. It was new old stock. I was very excited. And it's good. It's just not my favorite of all the Sheaffers I own, but there you have it. I have a similar nib on the Sheaffer Stylist. The model is the 444 Broad. I'm curious to try this. This is from Australia. It's marked palladium. I don't really know what it actually is. Maybe it's palladium, maybe it's steel, but I figured we would look at this one in conjunction with the previous pen just to get a sense of what these types of nibs look like. So this is the, there we go, the Sheaffer Stylist 444 Broad. It is buttery smooth. And I will say that one of the things, I don't know if it's the fact that the previous one was steel and this is palladium, or it's just the way the tipping is done. And like we saw, the Australian broad snorkel had very generous tipping. This is extremely pleasant to use. And again, you do get some line variation just by virtue of how they shape the nib. So again, very affordable. You can get these in really any nib width you want. You can get nib, I saw on eBay someone selling just loose nib units that are like new old stock. And the bottom line is that, you know, you can, for very little money, you can get a pretty straightforward pen. Obviously it has the converter, so it fills, you know, we're sort of moving past the kind of more complicated vintage filling systems and now just talking about older pens with converters or cartridges. So in terms of the cartridge converter pens we're going to look at for the rest of this episode, we're going to start talking mainly about different variations on the inlaid nib. So here is one. I don't know the exact model of it. This one is inked with, I think, a black ink, and it is a broad steel nib. So let's have a look at this one. So I believe this is also an Imperial. There we go. So we have the Sheaffer Imperial, and it has a CC filler and a steel broad. And as you can see, this one, which I believe is American, I believe it was made in the US, is a very generous writer. I will tell you that this pen has been continuously inked for like 3 months and hasn't dried out. So if that's anything to tell you about the durability of these things, take that with you. For another variation, we have this one. Similar Imperial design, inlaid design, but you can see the cutout is a slightly different shape. Now, this one was sold as a stub. You can see that it's slightly bent. I strained it a little bit, but let's just see how this writes to get a sense of whether this really is a stub. Most of the stubs that I'm familiar with are not so rounded on the bottom. This looks like it's probably just some version of broad. I don't know if this is stamped where it was made. You can see there it says Sheaffer's. Usually it says made in USA. All right, let's see how this writes. All right, we'll see if this writes. It has some dried ink in it that I think is affecting the flow, but let's take a look. So this is the Sheaffer inlaid. I mean, it looks mainly like kind of like a mix between a stub and a broad. It has a mystery nib but is nice and smooth. So I wonder if I clean it out, what will be, but it does write very much like a stub, even though it's more rounded on the bottom than I normally expect with something. But you can see it's starting to flow now that it got kicking. So a little bit of cleaning, a little bit of TLC on this nib, because as you can see, it's got like that little bit of a bend in it. We'll probably get this thing exactly where it needs to be. I wonder if you tune it up and it's writing more on that rounded side right there, meaning you unbend it and then it's making more contact, if it'll look more like the broad than it would a stub. But nonetheless, still a nice fun nib. And now we're getting into pens where you can find these things in various colors. So if you don't like black, you may find a blue, a red, a green, various things. So here is another Imperial. This is the all metal one I think I showed you in the last episode, and I believe this has a steel medium. You can see the profile of that cutout is a little bit similar to the pen we just looked at. Let's get a little bit close up for you. There it is. I had put a vintage Sheaffer ink in here and it got a little moldy, so I cleaned it out. So I haven't used this since I cleaned it out, so hopefully everything is okay, but let's give it a shot. So here is the Sheaffer Steel M Inlaid nib, and it is everything you would want from a pen like this. And I'll say it's got a little more weight because of the metal body, which is kind of nice, and it's got that matte finish, so it's also very enjoyable to hold. So that is the steel medium. Let's take a look at another steel medium. I don't know why I just said steel medium. I meant to say steel broad. So we looked at two broads, or a broad and a stub before. This is a different version of this nib. You can see it's longer, bigger. The pen overall is bigger than the one we just looked at and the previous couple pens with these inlaid nibs. So let's see how this one writes. So here we have the Sheaffer Big Imperial, and I think this has some leftover ink in it from something. I don't know what, but I don't remember inking this pen, so I'm a little mystified of how I came to be able to write with this with a different colored ink. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, it looks like someone previously inked it. Anyway, dip it in water and let it rehydrate. Yeah, that's what's going on. Anyway, it's on par with the other broad nibs. I mean, it essentially is the same nib, just in different dimensions. And that's what I was kind of saying at the top, that at some point these nibs started to become way more standardized as they were being made. And so, what you find as being a broad in one or a medium in one is very similar to what you're going to find in the others. We come now to the Targa, which is one of my favorite Sheaffer models. I've been using Targas for years. They're very different than the Imperials, kind of in look. They're a little bit longer, generally speaking. They're thinner, they're tubular. There was a slim model, which I don't know if I remembered to say last time, but this is the standard size. And like the Imperials, it has inlaid nibs. So we're going to start here with a steel American broad. So let's check this out and see how it writes. I'm actually going to do it on the side here because I want to compare kind of what they look like. Actually, I'm going to do it up here. So let's check this out. So this is the Sheaffer Targa steel broad, and I believe that the pen is like an electroplated finish, which you see in some of the newer, well, I shouldn't say newer, but in some of the Targa and Imperial models, as we get closer and closer to the 80s and the 90s, they were doing some electroplating for the finish. So this is not silver. This doesn't say either way. So I believe it's electroplated, but I could be wrong. Someone who is a Targa scholar in the comments can correct me or give everyone the right info. So you can see that this one doesn't seem as generous. I mean, obviously it could be the ink. Let's write with it down here. I mean, it's very similar, but it's still, like, for me, the way this one writes, it feels a little bit finer than the Imperial steel nibs. I don't know what that's about. Again, this had these two other inks in it. This has the Sheaffer blue black. I'm not exactly sure if it's a wetter ink is going to give us a bigger line here, or this. I didn't really check that out, but you can see that it is somewhat on par, but maybe not as heavy as the Imperial nibs. Nonetheless, really nice to write with and something people should check out. For comparison, we have a Targa in 14 karat gold, also a broad nib. Let's give this one a try and see how it compares to some of the other broads we've been looking at from a similar time period. So our two previous attempts didn't go well, so hopefully we got the third one will be the right one. So this is the Sheaffer Targa, and obviously it's just been dipped and it's writing pretty wet. This is the 14K broad nib, and it is silky smooth. It puts down a lot of ink. It's not filled, and because it was dipped, it was having some issues, but you kind of get the sense, right? So similar to the steel, but also similar to the other steel broads we were looking at, right? Very nice pen. What I'll say is this is the stainless steel finish, so something similar to these, but obviously a different shape. And again, I love the Targa, so you're not going to hear me say anything negative about these pens. All right, I got one more Targa to show you, and then if you can believe it, we'll be done with all the pens. This Targa with this lovely black kind of velvety matte finish is a 14K Targa, but it's an Australian nib. So let's see how this one writes. Again, I think it already looks a little more generous than the other broads we've looked at, but I pulled it just as another sample. So this one, I tried to put some ink in it, but it has residual ink from the previous owner. So we're going to try writing with that. I kind of primed it in my tub of water, and we'll see how it writes, but it should work similarly to what we've been looking at so far. So this is the Sheaffer. As you see, it's a little wonky on the first stroke, but there it is. This is the Sheaffer Targa, and we have a 14K nib from down under. And I would say it's probably very similar to the 14K nib from the US. Really, you can't go wrong with any of these three broads, whether it's the 14K or the steel. But I love these. You can, again, find these in different nib grades. The mediums are nice. Obviously, they're going to be similar to the mediums we looked at before, but, just one of my favorite all-time pens. I know I said this would be my last one, but as is often the case, we have a late edition. As I said, I have a late addition to our lineup here, and that is, of course, another Targa. I said I like them, right? I decided to show you this just because, this is, again, a pen I used a lot, and I would be remiss if I didn't show you something sort of unusual. Again, these types of nibs sometimes command a premium, but as you can see here, we have, and there's a little bit of fiber or something, we have an oblique stub. And again, they say stub, I tell you this is going to write more like what a lot of you are familiar with when it comes to a cursive italic. This one, I believe I got the pen, and somewhere I have a medium nib that fits in here. I tried to find it for this episode. I don't know where I put it. It's stored away somewhere in various spots that I have nibs in. And I wanted to just write with this so you could see something that's sort of different than everything else that we've looked at for the most part today, and how that writes to round out our episode here. So let's check this one out. Here we have our Sheaffer Targa. It is a steel OB stub. And to me, it is more like a cursive italic. It's much sharper than what I would say its stub is. It has corners, but as you can see, it produces a very exciting line. So if you like, well, that's not good. What I would say is that, again, it may be a little bit difficult to find, but if you're interested in something like this, it's out there. You just gotta shop around for it. So there you have it. I think we went through something like 26 different nibs together. I hope that seeing this all written out is further inspiration why you should give some of these older pens a chance. I think that there's incredible value, there's incredible experience. It is a way of experiencing something new if you're feeling burnt out, if you're annoyed or disappointed by the ever increasing price increases or the tariffs, what have you. Wherever you are in the world, you can find these pens. You can find a lot of them at a really great price. And doing maybe a little reading online or something, or talking to somebody who knows, you can come out of it with like a really great pen, and it'll give you a writing experience unlike anything you've experienced before if you've been focused on, purely modern pens. That is, things made from 2010 on. Those pens are great. They're just different. And so, again, my pitch to everyone at the end of all of this, and, 2 fairly long episodes on Sheaffer, a long episode on Parker, my pitch is everyone should just think about it as an addition, not something you have to switch to. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I look forward to talking to you about more exciting pen things and seeing you in a future episode. Thank you so much, and goodbye.